Hello, everyone. This is section 1 of lesson 4 of Pre-Socratics to Augustine, also called History of Philosophy 1. We continue to talk about Parmenides. We talked last time about the list of characteristics that Parmenides assigns to being. The very first of these is that being is ungenerated. Now, we haven't yet really explored what that means because it is a tricky question, and I want to devote this session to it. Now, when Parmenides offers a kind of justification or reasoning or rationale for this claim that being is ungenerated, that passage is incredibly famous. It is famous for two reasons. It contains a proto-version or an ancestor of what later comes to be called the principle of sufficient reason. What is the principle of sufficient reason? That is the idea that if something comes about or if it is generated, there's got to be something that causes it. Nothing comes about or is generated without there being a reason or a cause. And a version of that idea comes up here in fragment B8, which we are discussing, and that is a really, really famous and complicated idea. The other reason that this bit of the Parmenidean poem is famous is because of the structure of the argument that Parmenides is putting forward. So if you think we haven't yet talked about the structure of arguments or really what arguments even are, so here's like one little bit of terminology. When you put forward an argument, then you may have something that you want to show. And the technical term, at least, in the tradition that uses some Latin terminology, is that you have a demonstrandum. Literally, that means you have something that is to be demonstrated. So suppose you are Parmenides and your demonstrandum is that being is ungenerated. Now, you can either offer a direct argument, direct proof. So here's my claim, being is ungenerated. Here's why. Here's my conclusion, being is ungenerated. But that is not what Parmenides does. Rather, he offers what is called a reductio ad absurdum. That is an indirect proof in the sense that you're not saying, here's my demonstrandum, here's why, hence my demonstrandum is true. Rather, you're saying, here is the negation of my demonstrandum. And that leads to absurdity. Hence, my demonstrandum has to be true. That's a very famous kind of mode of argument. And we are using this lecture and this text to just also get to know that type of argument. So what is it that Parmenides is saying? He's saying, well, let's say our claim is, our demonstrandum is, being is ungenerated. The negation of that would be that being is generated. If it were generated, well, how? There would be two options. Either it would come from what is not, from nothing, or it would come from what is. So let's look at both of the options. Parmenides starts with the second option, that it comes from what is not, from nothing. That is the moment in the poem when he offers a version of the principle of sufficient reason. Because he says, well, where would it come from if, as it were, it would come from nothing? That would not be a reason or a cause for it to come about, because nothing just isn't a cause. So the option that being comes from nothing isn't an option, is an absurd option, because nothing isn't a cause or a reason. So that option doesn't work. And then the other option would be that what is comes from what is. But that seems to be a tautology. That just seems like, what is already is. So it's not causing itself. That doesn't make sense either. So we have kind of excluded both of the options. It's absurd to think that it comes from nothing because nothing isn't the cause. So that violates the principle of sufficient reason. It is also absurd to think that what is comes from what is because that's already it. So presumably that is exhaustive. This is a term that we already introduced. There are no further options. Either it comes from what is or it comes from what is not. Both options are absurd. Hence, the claim that being is generated is absurd, and hence our demonstrandum that it is ungenerated is demonstrated. That is the structure of the text. And the task that I have for you today is that I would like you to come up with your own reductio ad absurdum argument. And in this case, not for the claim that being is ungenerated, but rather for another very famous Parmenidean claim, namely that being is one. So the task is that you come up with a reductio ad absurdum argument for the demonstrandum that being is one. And that means you have to start with the premise that being is many, but with the aim of showing that that leads to absurdity.